Hello, this is Laura Robinson from the Chattanooga Area Food Bank, and I am going to walk through the steps of doing a winter sowing project. And if you've never heard of winter sowing before, it's basically a project that mimics the natural life cycle of a seed. So if you think about if you've ever planted flowers in your yard, when the flower dies, it drops its seeds on the ground. And if, birds don't come and eat all the seeds will sit there over the winter through all the cold weather. And then when the weather warms up, the seeds will then germinate. So we're basically just doing that same thing. We're going to put seeds in a kind of greenhouse-like situation, put it outside when it's cold. The seeds will sit outside, be exposed to the natural elements, and then they will start to germinate, hopefully, once the weather warms up. A lot of seeds need a cold period in order to germinate. So if you've ever tried starting perennials or flowers before, sometimes on the back of the packet it'll say it needs cold stratification for a certain amount of time. This basically takes care of that cold period because it's just outside when it's during the time of year when it's naturally cold. So we here in Chattanooga are in zone 8 now, I believe. We're going through our first kind of cold snap right now. It's early December, but then it's going to warm up a little bit next week. So we'll just kind of have to see how our weather patterns this winter are going to affect this project. Last winter, I was able to get a number of things to germinate through this process. I probably had like a 50% success rate, but I also think there were certain seeds I planted last year that didn't need cold stratification. So it's all been a learning process. So this year I think I'm at least picking better seeds to start outside. So all that to say, we're just kind of learning as we go with this process, but I'll show you what I've done in the past and how we'll get it set up. I have done this, I think this will be my 3rd year. So I have learned a couple things. So let's just start with the containers first. These were used last year, but you can see I have containers that are a decent size. They're not teeny tiny. They're either clear or opaque to let the sunlight in. And I have cut the containers, and I'm doing this one-handed, so it's a little bit hard to see. But you can see I cut the containers about a third, I would say, third of the way up from the bottom. And I've cut them around except for a hinge. So make sure you leave a hinge. That hinge is probably at least 1 inch or 2 long on one corner so that you can open up the container, fill it with soil and your seeds, and then close the container back. Now, one important thing, I don't know if you can see it, but I have punched holes in the bottom. You will need drainage in your containers, so make sure you punch plenty of holes in the bottom and make sure that you leave the top open. It will get the rain that you naturally get over the winter months. If you are going through a dry spell, you might want to walk around and keep an eye on these every week or so and pour a little water in the top. But you shouldn't have to reopen this cut section after it gets taped, and I'll show you kind of that process. You should be able to just leave it closed. Now, once it comes to the springtime, that's when you do have to keep an eye on the temperatures, because if you notice that you have seeds germinating and then all of a sudden you get kind of a warm spell in the middle of February, if it gets too hot out, your seedlings are going to die because they're in this, basically a little tiny greenhouse that is going to warm up pretty fast. So just keep an eye on these. Again, like I said, once springtime comes around, you'll need to keep an eye out for temperatures throughout the winter, keep an eye on water, but otherwise it should be a fairly hands-off process. Okay, so let me show you the seeds that I'm using. Now I'm keeping track of everything I'm planting here. I think it's best to have, for you to keep track of it both on paper and on the container itself. The first year I did this, the markings on the container rubbed off or, came off with the weather. And so I had no idea what I had planted outside. But if you have it listed both by number and by the type of seed that's in the inside, and then you line up your containers in numerical order, then even if for some reason the markings come off on the container, if it's the third one in, then you're gonna know that it's the Rattlesnake Master. So that's just an easy way to kind of keep track of things. Like I mentioned before, a lot of what's planted in winter sowing are perennials. You can also plant, and I have not done this, I don't think the first year, maybe the first year I tried, but you can also do vegetables. Like if there are a number of vegetables that you want to plant in the spring, you could always try winter sowing those to get kind of a head start on your spring vegetables. But I always start vegetables in the greenhouse anyway. So I'll go through the plants that I am doing this year. I'm doing Obedient Plant, which I've never planted before, but it's a native that's good in like wetter conditions. Tennessee Coneflower, Rattlesnake Master. This is one that I do remember having good germination last year. Aromatic Aster, Bachelor Buttons, Alyssum, which I love Alyssum. I don't think I did this one last year in winter sowing, but I always start Alyssum every year because it's such a great plant to have in the garden. It attracts a ton of like kind of the smaller pollinators, like little bees and wasps and those kinds of things. Pansies, this is yarrow. I don't really know how to pronounce that. Achillea, but commonly called yarrow. Rudbeckia, calendula, butterfly weed, blanket flower. There are a couple that I have ordered. I think the only two that I don't have that I have in order are the pincushion flowers and boneset. And boneset is a native plant. If you're not familiar with it, it did germinate really well for me last year. And it was a plant that it's perennial, and I planted it kind of on the outside of our rain garden. It had a long bloom period. It seemed to attract a lot of pollinators. So it's definitely something that I am going to plant more of. But those two are on order right now, so I won't be able to plant those quite yet, but it's only December, so we should still have plenty of cold period of the year to kind of make this work. Okay, so let me show you a finished container. So you can see I did clean the container off if you're reusing something from last year, or if it's a new container, you want to make sure to rinse it out really well, because if there was something sugary in there, you want to make sure that that's well cleaned out. I took my container, I rinsed it off really well on the outside, just so that when I put the tape around it, it will stick, because if it's wet at all or dirty, the tape's not going to stick. So this is a finished one. You can see I taped up the cut section along the bottom, and then I put more tape on the top to put what's inside. I think the first year I wrote it directly on the container, and that's when it washed off. So that's why I put it on tape, and it looks like from the containers I used last year, the tape held on well and the marking stayed on there. So that's what a finished container looks like. Here's one that is in the process of being done. So you can see I filled it mostly with soil, not completely to the top, but mostly to the top. And then let me actually grab I want to show you a couple of things on the package. Wait, which one haven't I done yet? Obedient Plant. Oh wait, that's the one I just put in there. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a couple of these to show you. Okay, so make sure whatever you're planting, look at the back of the container. This one says, it'll tell you the planting depth. This one says 0 inches deep, so that means you just sprinkle the seeds on the top and take your hand and press the seeds into the soil, but you don't cover the seeds. And then on this one, I have it's 0.1 inches deep. So that means I'm gonna put my seeds on, and I do sprinkle them on pretty thick. Just FYI, you can do it however you want, but I do sprinkle the seeds on pretty thick because I can then separate them later. But this one says 0.1 inches, so I sprinkle the seeds on and then just barely cover it with soil. And then do make sure that you water it well. You do have to be careful, you know, if you have a sprayer that the water comes out kind of hard, you need to kind of back off and make sure you're spraying it really gently. That way you don't dislodge the seeds. And then so I've already put my seeds in this one. I've barely covered it with soil. I've watered it in. So then I would just close this up, put tape on the outside. I've used just this packing tape, and it seems to work fine. It's held on through the weather. I'm sure there are other options out there, but this is what I've used. So you tape it up really well, make sure it's well sealed. Sometimes these containers are a little bit tricky to get them to line up, but just go around a few times and then put another piece of tape, mark what it is, and then you can just stick it outside. I usually do try to put it in a somewhat protected area, like you don't want to put it in an area where it would just like blow over and the contents all tip out. But make sure it's getting plenty of sun, just like any other seed would need. You know, if you're just keeping it in a shady area, it's not going to naturally wake up when it starts to warm outside because there's no sunshine. So for me, I typically put on the other side of this fence, I kind of rest it up against the fence, and there are some tables out there that are over the top. Not that it really does that much, but it's, you know, it has a tiny bit of protection, and it's up against the fence so it doesn't tip over. But I'm sure you could kind of plop them in various places. You know, even if you have a garden bed and you want to just kind of stick a couple of jars inside your garden bed, that way it kind of has a place to rest. That would also work. So I think that's about it. Hopefully this was a good enough overview to get you started. And please let me know if you have any comments or questions. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.